Today, we talk about the biggest winners and losers of the free agency period for the New York Rangers. Among the people we'll discuss are Kaapo Kakko, Chris Drury, and several more.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1106 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. So I want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting the way we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the free agency period has essentially come and gone, and I realize there are a couple of free agents that are still hanging around, and ultimately, they'll eventually sign with one team or another, and we'll see if the Rangers are in on any of those free agents. We might even do an episode a little bit later this week where we take a look at the best of the rest UFAs that are still out there, talk about maybe this guy or that guy could be a fit for the Rangers. Like I said, most of the big dominoes have fallen, so I don't think the Rangers are going to do anything too splashy, but could they add a defenseman, a forward? I suppose it's certainly at least possible. But the thing I want to do today, now that most of the dust has settled from that insane sprint that you get at the start of free agency, I want to talk about the winners and losers of the free agency period for the New York Rangers. And we'll start with the winners, and one player that may not come to mind right away, but I think he might honestly be the biggest winner of the free agency period for the New York Rangers, and that's going to be Kappo Kakko. And I realize there might be some Ranger fans out there that are kind of over Kappo Kakko. They'd like the Rangers to move on. They see him as a guy that needs a change of scenery. Maybe you do like a 1-for-1 trade with Kakko going to some other team, and the Rangers are receiving a player that, like Kakko, could also use a change of scenery. Maybe you just trade him for a draft pick. You do that as a way to clear some salary. That's also a possibility. And when you look at his career numbers, I can understand why some people think that way. It has been 5 years now, exactly 300 games for Kappo Kakko. He's got a grand total of just 117 points in those 300 games. I do think there's some things he does good for this Ranger team. But overall, certainly he has not lived up to being the second overall pick and all the hype that came along with it. I think that's also more than fair to say at this point. But the reason he's a winner here, if we take Kappo Kakko at his word and we just assume that he's telling the truth, and that he's being very genuine, which I think he is, when he talks about how, he was asked on breakdown day or breakup day, whatever it's called, his future with the Rangers, asked all those questions. Does he see himself here long-term? And he sounds like he really genuinely wants to figure it out here. He sounds like he really likes his teammates, really enjoys playing in New York, really likes the fans, really likes being part of a winning team. And he gets all that in New York. And if we assume that he's telling the truth there, then it looks like he's probably going to get his wish for this upcoming season. Now, of course, it's at least possible that Kappo Kakko is still traded. Never say never. But the reason he's a winner here is, again, we are assuming that he's telling the truth there, that he wants to stay in New York and that he wants to be a Ranger. And if the Rangers would have gone out and gotten, say, a Patrick Kane or a Tyler Toffoli, a Tyler Bertuzzi, Vladimir Tarasenko, he lingered for a couple of days there. If they go out and they get one of those players, then it becomes at least slightly less likely that Kappo Kakko is still around. But the bottom line is the Rangers did not do any of that. The only right winger that they added is Riley Smith. They did that via trade. And you can basically see Riley Smith as Jack Roslovic's replacement. And I think that's an upgrade for the Rangers. But the bottom line, they lost one right winger in Jack Roslovic. They picked up another right winger in Riley Smith. And that position still, after all these years, basically since the start of the Locked on New York Ranger podcast, right wing has been probably the biggest weakness on this Ranger team, or at least the position where they're the thinnest. Even if you now count Lafreniere as a right winger, which I do because he played there all last season and had the best season of his career, they're still thin there. And I just get the feeling that the Rangers being constructed the way they currently are, if Kappo Kakko still wants to be in New York, he's probably going to get his wish. Because, yeah, you could trade Kappo Kakko for a draft pick or, a 1-for-1 swap. Maybe you bring in like a center. I mean, I don't know. But the bottom line is the Rangers seem less likely at this point to trade from a position where they're already kind of thin, and do that before the season and make themselves even thinner. So for all those reasons, I feel like Kappo Kakko is probably going to stick around and he will play out this 1-year deal. that he just signed in the offseason. He's back with the Rangers on a 1-year contract. And next season, I don't know. This feels like it might be the end of the line for Kaapo Kakko, that at best, this will be his last season with the Rangers, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And like I said, Kaapo Kakko going to have one more chance, chance number 6, essentially, to have a breakout season with the New York Rangers and hopefully be a contributing member of this team. And it sounds like that's what he wants. And if that is the case, that's what he gets. And honestly, I wouldn't rule him out being in the top 6 to start next season. I personally would not have him there, but it basically comes down to probably either Riley Smith or Kaapo Kakko playing with Zibanejad and Kreider. If we assume, and there's no guarantee of this, but if we assume for now that they will keep the Panarin, Trocheck, and Lafreniere line together, then that means you're basically down to 2 options for top-line right wing. And I think they'll probably go with Smith, but Kaapo Kakko has at least a shot of opening the season there. So he's a big winner from free agency, period. I think also Zack Jones. Zack Jones this past season, we saw him play probably the best hockey that he's ever played, the most consistent hockey. And of course, he got more games last season than he ever did in his career. Jones now has played 4 different seasons or parts of 4 different seasons with the Rangers. And from least recent to most recent, his games have gone up every season, 10 games, 12 games, 16 games, and now 31 games this past year. And just looked like a very confident player and somebody that was capable of going out there, holding his own at the NHL level. And one of the biggest reasons that he's a winner is that the coast is clear for him to finally step into that 6th defenseman role. You know, he was the 7th defenseman for the Rangers for basically this entire preceding season here, and he was behind 6 different guys in the pecking order. But anytime that somebody got hurt, or in the case of Jacob Trouba, got suspended, it was always Zack Jones that was stepping in to that role. But Erik Gustafsson is gone now. He left in free agency, signs a 2-year deal with Detroit, and that spot now is ripe for the taking for Zack Jones. And the Rangers really, when you look at the other things they've done in free agency, or more accurately, the things they have not done, there's not really a whole lot of competition there for Zack Jones for that number 6 defenseman spot. I mean, they signed defenseman Casey Fitzgerald to a 2-year deal, but he might start the season in the AHL. He's only played 63 career NHL games at the age of 27. Brandon Scanlon and Connor Mackey, they're both still here. They both played 1 game with the Rangers last season. Ben Harper could be back in the mix after suffering the injury last year. I guess Matthew Robertson, in theory, could still be a threat, but I don't see any of those guys surpassing Zack Jones in the pecking order between now and opening night. Of course, it's also possible that the Rangers still go out there and sign a veteran defenseman. Stranger things have certainly happened, but the way things look right now, honestly, it looks like the biggest competition when it comes to the Ranger defenseman is probably going to be for that 7th defenseman spot. And it'll be all those guys I just mentioned: Fitzgerald, Scanlon, Mackey, Harper, maybe Robertson. Although Robertson, I feel like they wouldn't want him as the 7th defenseman, because if he's not going to be in the NHL lineup, they'll want him in the AHL lineup and not sitting in the press box all the time. But bottom line, I mean, Zack Jones, this is very clearly at this point his job to lose. That's assuming they don't do anything else. They don't trade Jones. They don't add anybody in free agency. But right now, Zack Jones has the inside track, very much the inside track to that job. And I think he deserves it based on what he did last year. It's time to give him a little bit of rope, give him a shot, and give him the opportunity to be in the lineup and stay in the lineup. I mean, obviously he's got to produce and he's got to play well, but that opportunity should be his for the taking this upcoming season. It looks like it's going to be. Another big winner in free agency for the Rangers, I'm actually going to go with one of the newest members on the team, and that's going to be Riley Smith. He looks like somebody that might be a prime change of scenery candidate. Just didn't seem to click with him and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Only 40 points in 76 games. Not that that's like a brutal total, but we've seen him score at a much higher clip than that at other points in his career, namely the 6 seasons that he spent with the Vegas Golden Knights. Just the season before last year, he ended up with 56 points in 78 games. And when it comes to his scoring, he can be a little bit up and down year to year, but I just get the feeling, looking at the Penguins depth chart from this past year, looking at the Rangers and the players that they're bringing back, he's going to be in a much better position this upcoming season to, step on the gas a little bit and up his point total to where it was, a couple of seasons ago. And he's a free agent after this year, so you got to figure the motivational will be there. He's also won a Stanley Cup with the Vegas Golden Knights. You got to believe he'd like a second Stanley Cup on his resume. And the other thing here, too, why he's a winner is that I do think, as I mentioned a second ago when we were talking about Kakko, that Riley Smith probably is the guy with slightly the inside track of being the top line right winger to start the season with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. And we know it's very well documented. We've talked about it on here a bunch. The revolving door that has been, attached to that top line right wing spot. They've tried just about everybody there. Riley Smith's probably going to get his chance, if not on opening night, then certainly at some point down the line this season, but probably on opening night. And if he's the guy that can kind of, get Mika and Kreider back up to a certain level when it comes to 5v5 play, and he just seems to click with them, and oh my God, this is the best winger they've had since Pavel Buchnevich, then Ranger fans are going to absolutely love this guy. And the fact that, you take him away from the Penguins after a down season, and you put him on the Rangers, and maybe his scoring goes back up, for that reason alone, it just makes it a little bit more fun. If this guy can have a down season with the Penguins of all teams, and then come back to come over to the Rangers and, obviously see an uptick in his production, I think that's going to be a really fun aspect as well. And hey, just going from the Penguins to the Rangers, you're already a winner, are you not? So there's that aspect to it as well. But wasn't all, sunshine and roses for the Rangers during this free agency period. There were a couple of players and one person behind the scenes who I already mentioned that you could probably classify as losers for the Rangers during the free agency period. And we're going to talk about a couple of those players and people in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by our very good friends at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing the way we all want them to. But FanDuel lets us keep the sports going whenever we want. All we have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that we're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a bonus or a boost daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. I just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And for the everydayers, can't thank you guys enough. Be sure to stick around with Locked On New York Rangers throughout this entire offseason here. Next episode, we're going to do some final thoughts on the Jacob Trouba situation now that it seems to be kind of quiet on that front. Nothing is really happening. So I'm going to have my final thoughts on how that whole situation was handled and how it might ultimately end between Trouba and the Rangers, if he's going to be here next season on opening night, if he'll still be the captain, all that good stuff. Going to look at one of the remaining UFAs, and admittedly, I forgot to check this right before I hit record here, but I'm pretty sure Daniel Sprong is still out there. If he's not, we'll talk about a different UFA. And we're also going to look at the Ranger 4th round draft pick. They took this individual at number 119 overall. That would be Raul Bouliard. And if I'm mispronouncing that, we'll fix it in the next episode, or we'll fix it whenever Sam Rosen gets to call his name. But he was taken in the 4th round by the Rangers, and we'll discuss him in the next episode as well. But as for right now, the biggest losers of the free agency period for the New York Rangers, number one has got to be, you can make a case. It's kind of 1 and 1A here, but we'll start with Jacob Trouba. Let me say, not all of this has been his fault. There was certainly some shoddy reporting along the way here that didn't paint him in a very good light. There's also been the Rangers, perhaps not handling this situation as well as they possibly could have handled it. I don't know what was to gain by leaking the trade framework to the media once they, seemingly had a deal in place with Detroit. If that's even true or not, we don't even know because, again, let's just say the reporting along the way here from a certain individual has definitely left something to be desired. And we'll just leave it at that for now. But, where there's smoky, I believe there's at least some fire. Obviously, no trade materialized, at least not yet. And I got to believe, based on everything that we heard this offseason and just based on the way that Jacob Trouba performed this season in general, but certainly in the postseason, there was definitely a period there where the Rangers were at least shopping Jacob Trouba around and seeing what offers were out there and if there might be a way to shed him, as well as his big salary cap hit. The only thing that I really have a problem with as far as Trouba is concerned is if he really did threaten to not report to a team that could trade for him. Because as we know, Jacob Trouba's full no-move clause went to a partial no-move clause on July 1st. That is the first day that it went from full to partial. And he signed that contract. He agreed to those terms. And if he's sabotaging trades by threatening to not report at all, then that's not okay, and that's not good. It's unprofessional, and frankly, it's unacceptable. And if that does turn out to be true, and we don't know because, again, the reporting here, who knows? We don't know the full story. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I do know the full story, but if that is the case, then I think that's kind of a black eye on Jacob Trouba, and I think his reputation really takes a hit because of that. But regardless of what happens, a lot of Ranger fans believe that this was going to go down and the Rangers were going to find a way to shade all or at least some of Jacob Trouba's salary. And of course, now it doesn't look like that's going to happen. The other reason why Trouba is a loser from this whole situation is that, again, everything that came out here, it just looks like a mess. It looks like Trouba was doing everything possible, even things that, I guess you could argue are a little bit unethical if what that turns out to be true. The part about him refusing to report to a team that trades for him as a way to sabotage the trade. And again, we don't know for sure if that's true or not. But all this is just a messy, ugly situation. There were a lot of Ranger fans that were already fed up with Trouba. They can't understand why they're paying this guy $8 million a season. His play in the postseason left something to be desired, to put it very mildly. And I just feel like it's not going to be a comfortable situation for Jacob Trouba. I'm not condoning anybody making threats, or you see these deranged people usually on anonymous accounts on Twitter, whatever it might be, saying all these messed up things about Trouba and his family. I don't condone that for a second. And honestly, even going to games, I'm not one for booing my own players, a player on the Rangers. But Jacob Trouba might hear it from Ranger fans this season. And it's not completely unwarranted. I mean, again, for me, I don't boo somebody. I would never boo anybody unless there is a consistent and obvious lack of effort, and that's not Jacob Trouba. You can say what you want about this guy. You can be annoyed by the contract. You can be fed up with the way this whole thing went down this offseason. You can be mad about the way he played in the playoffs. That's all fair game. It's not in any way, though, fair to say that Jacob Trouba is that dude that doesn't hustle and deserves to be booed because of it. That guy goes out there and sacrifices his body every night, all the hitting, all the block shots. He'll fight if he has to. Just a hard-nosed, blue-collar throwback player. But listen, fans pay for their tickets, and those tickets aren't cheap, and they have every right to cheer or boo any player as much or as little as they want to. Again, I'm not a big fan of it, but I get the feeling there could be some Ranger fans where Jacob Trouba hears it. And really, the only way that this story has a happy ending for Jacob Trouba, the only way that he'll really redeem himself in the eyes of most Ranger fans is if the New York Rangers win the Stanley Cup this upcoming season, because he's got 2 years left on his deal. And, 2 years from now, I just can't see Jacob Trouba still being on this roster. That's the offseason where they need a new contract for Igor, a new contract for Lafreniere, a new contract for K'Andre Miller, maybe even Kaapo Kakko. I mean, that's going to get pretty dicey. You can't keep everybody. And I just don't know that Kakko's going to be a Ranger past this upcoming season at the most. But the bottom line, there's a lot of money that the Rangers are going to need. And you cannot be letting go of Igor Shesterkin or Alexi Lafreniere because you're still paying Jacob Trouba $8 million a season. After this year, one way or another, waivers, trade, buyout, one way or another, Jacob Trouba is going to be gone. So really, he's got one last shot at it. The Rangers in general, in the era with Jacob Trouba as their captain, they've got one last shot at it, and that is to win the Stanley Cup this upcoming season. That's a complete redemption story, and what a story that would be. But to me, that's the only way that this ends with a storybook happy ending for Jacob Trouba and his tenure with the New York Rangers. The other loser that I have to say of the free agency period, I got to say Chris Drury, and I've defended Chris Drury a lot. I do think that since he's become the general manager of the Rangers, there has been more good than bad. He's had more hits than misses, as I like to say. But if we're being honest here, you look at the trade deadline from this past season, really wasn't that good. I mean, you bring in Roslovic, Wenberg, and Ruedel. These are not guys that are going to move the needle that much and put you over the top to win a Stanley Cup championship. I mean, they can all be steady contributors in the right situation, but yeah, just lack the splashy move. And for a team that had the best record in hockey for most of the season and ended up with the best record in hockey, you'd like to see them go a little bit more all in. And I know, salary cap constraints and the asking price is too high and this, that, and the other thing, but it felt like a very, tepid trade deadline period for Chris Drury. And now we get to free agency in this offseason, and the biggest free agent that he signed was Sam Carrick. You could say Riley Smith, but that was a trade, so technically that's not a free agent signing. The biggest move that he makes in free agency as far as signings are concerned is Sam Carrick. And again, you could say the same thing. Well, you know what? Next season we need more money. We can't have a Tyler Toffoli contract or a Jonathan Marchessault contract overlapping with players that need new contracts for the Rangers next season. I totally get that. But there's always ways around that. You could try to go 1 year, high average annual value for one of the bigger names. You could have at least given that a shot. Maybe the Rangers did. And there's a trio of players that I keep mentioning, guys like Mantha, Zucker, Skinner, all those guys signed 1 year contracts. It was right there for you. None of them are high paid. I think the highest price there, I think Zucker might have gotten $5 million. Mantha and Skinner rather were both around like $3 million. So there's always ways to do it. And I don't know, it just feels like there could have been more done in free agency. And of course, the other reason Drury's a loser, I mean, we already talked about this, is that a loser of free agency period. He's not a loser in the grand scheme of things. A loser in free agency period is because the way he handled the Jacob Trouba situation has been a little shaky. Again, I don't understand where that report came from with the trade with Detroit or why he would leak that out there. It'd be better off to just kind of keep it quiet. Hope that Trouba does not include Detroit on his no move clause and then pull the trigger and strike the deal. But yeah, not the best offseason, not the best really, like, I guess 2024 so far for Chris Drury, because again, the trade deadline was shaky and the offseason has been shaky as well. One more loser of free agency period that I'll throw out there for the time being, and this is basically an honorable mention. I'm going to say it's Ryan Lindgren. He hasn't done anything wrong at all, and you guys know the everydayers. I'm a big fan of Ryan Lindgren, possibly my favorite player on the team. But he filed for salary arbitration. That's procedural, and we'll talk about that going forward on Locked On Rangers as well. But this whole Trouba situation, to me, makes it a little bit less likely that Ryan Lindgren is going to be here next season, because, you know, this thing with Ryan Lindgren, it could go to salary arbitration. He's going to be getting a raise, and we'll see. Hopefully the Rangers and Lindgren can come to some kind of an agreement. But if Jacob Trouba is still here making $8 million a season, you know, Ryan Lindgren, that's the big debate, you know, among Ranger fans. Trade him, sign him to a short or long-term deal. He is only 26 years old. You can make a case either way. But if they're paying $8 million a year to Jacob Trouba, they might feel like they can't afford to pay, you know, $3.5 million or $4 million a year to Ryan Lindgren. And that's unfortunate, because I'd much rather have Ryan Lindgren on this team going forward than Jacob Trouba. You might feel differently. Feel free to leave your comments in the comment section or email me. Do whatever you got to do. But that's kind of where I'm at on that whole situation. So, going to keep everything rolling in just a second. We're going to have our final thoughts on today's episode and talk about whether this Ranger roster is better than the roster that we saw last season. We will do that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Some final thoughts on the entire free agency period. So we talked about some winners in free agency. We talked about some losers in free agency. In spite of everything that I just said in the last section, I actually believe the Rangers currently, as constructed, have a better team this year than they had at the start of the season last year. And honestly, probably even at the end of the season last year, even after they made a handful of trade deadline additions. Obviously, you know, Roslovic and Wenberg and Ruedel, you know, he didn't play in the playoffs, but Roslovic and Wenberg were there. It's the second straight year I'm saying this. I said this right before the season started last year. And of course, the Rangers did improve, and, you know, they at least made it farther in the playoffs. They won more games. They won the President's Trophy, more points in the regular season. The Rangers at the start of last season had a better team than they did the season before that at the start of the season. And it's the same thing here. We don't know what the final opening night roster is going to be right now, but we have an idea. And I look on social media and I see a lot of Ranger fans saying that this team got worse. They regressed. Look, they didn't do as much as I thought they would do in free agency. They weren't as aggressive there as I thought they would be. The Riley Smith trade is still a little bit of a head scratcher for me. He's a solid player, but there were comparable players that I mentioned in the last section that were able to be had for similar prices, and you wouldn't have had to trade a second-round draft pick to one of your biggest rivals in the Pittsburgh Penguins. But with all that said, I don't get where these Ranger fans are coming from where they say this team got worse. Because basically, you look at, we'll just kind of go player for player here. So you've got Sam Carrick in the mix now. He's very likely going to center the fourth line. He takes the role that was recently held by Barclay Goodrow. Now, that one, I will admit, that feels like a slight downgrade, but it is more cost-effective because Barclay Goodrow making $3.64 million per season, Sam Carrick making $1 million per season. And eventually, hopefully, the Rangers can put that, you know, cap space that they saved to good use. I don't know if they'll make another free agent signing. I don't know if they'll have an active trade deadline this season. You know, we'll see how that goes. Or maybe even next season. You know, Goodrow will still have been under contract for next year, so you're paying Carrick less money next year than you'd be paying Barclay Goodrow next season as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's a slight downgrade on paper, and Goodrow obviously had the big playoff run, but I feel like it is more cost-effective for the Rangers. There's this one, and I mentioned this, a little bit earlier in the episode, just touch on it very briefly, but you've now basically got Riley Smith taking the place of Jack Roslovic. That feels like a pretty solid upgrade for the Rangers. You know, Roslovic was okay, but there were games in the playoffs where he was just a complete ghost. There were times where, you know, he was doing drive-bys, as so many people like to call it. And when you look at their career in general, Riley Smith has had a lot more success in the playoffs than Jack Roslovic has. And I feel like overall just a better player, a better bet for more offense from Riley Smith than Jack Roslovic. So they upgraded there, going from Jack Roslovic to Riley Smith. Also, if we're lucky, and we'll see, but if we're lucky, we could get a healthy Filipino basically taking the place of Alex Wennberg. Now, they are different players, and Alex Wennberg is more of a defensive forward, and he's out there able to kill penalties and all that good stuff. Filipino, though, can give you a lot more offense when he's healthy, and that's a big if, so we'll see. But it's at least encouraging that Filipino made it back, got to play in a handful of playoff games down the stretch here for the Rangers. So we'll see how that shakes out. But overall, I mean, Filipino, there's far more upside. He's younger than Alex Wennberg, and if he's healthy, he can be a contributing offensive member of this New York Ranger team. So going from Wennberg to Chytil, that to me is also an upgrade. Zack Jones is taking the place of Erik Gustafsson. I didn't think that Erik Gustafsson really played that poorly for the Rangers last season. You got to keep in mind, this is somebody that is bouncing all around the league, making six figures, and playing the role of the sixth defenseman. I'm not expecting Norris-level production from Gustafsson or anybody else that plays your sixth defenseman role. However, Zack Jones is younger than Erik Gustafsson, and to me, probably has a lot more upside. We've never seen Zack Jones in playoff hockey, and he is undersized for an NHL defenseman, so there is that to consider. Not that Erik Gustafsson was this giant, though, but in terms of upside and potential, and just honestly looking at last season, I feel like Zack Jones, at least down the stretch, probably played better than Erik Gustafsson. He certainly played better than Jacob Trouba, but they're not going to scratch their captain. You can honestly make the case down the stretch last year, because Zack Jones got a lot of time, that he was maybe like the third best defenseman on the Rangers. I feel like you could throw out that idea. And unfortunately, he was just the odd man out once everybody got healthy and once the playoffs started. But, Zack Jones, I feel like that has a very good chance to be an upgrade on Erik Gustafsson. You've also got Alexis Lafreniere, who I think is probably going to have the best season of his career. Took a bunch of steps in the right direction this past season. And you've still got guys like, Brandon Othmann and Brett Berard, who are waiting in the wings. I think we're going to see both of them at least play a couple of games for the Rangers this upcoming season. I think Othmann will be given every chance to make the team on opening night. We'll see. Maybe they like the idea of him starting with the AHL and you can call him up on an as-needed basis. But I think Othmann, depending on how he does in training camp in the preseason, he should and very likely will be given every opportunity to make this team. He's a hard-hitting player and obviously an offensive threat as well. Reportedly, the only area of his game that could still use some work is probably the defensive aspect of his game. But, by all accounts, he got better at that part of his game as, the season went on with the Wolfpack. So we'll see. Again, I think Othmann will be given every chance. And Brett Berard might be a situation like we saw with Othmann last year, like we saw with Cooley the year before that, where he's up for just a handful of games and they just give him a taste of NHL hockey, and then he's back on his way to the Hartford Wolfpack. But who knows? Maybe Brett Berard makes a team on opening night, never looks back, and is on the squad the entire season. I mean, stranger things have happened. And as we've seen in the past, guys like Schneider, guys like Miller, even Kakko and Lafreniere, they will give you your chance. The Rangers are not going to look at your age and just say, oh, no, you can't be in the NHL. They will give you an opportunity. If you earn it, they will give it to you, and they won't really have any qualms about your age or your youth, I guess we should say. But look, bottom line, two things can be true here. The Rangers did not do enough in free agency in the eyes of a lot of people, and I feel like, at least one more solid move really would have been nice and would have made a lot of us feel a little bit better about the free agency period. But they didn't do that. So you can make the case, certainly, that they did not do enough when free agency started. But you can also make a very strong case that this team, maybe not massively better than last season's roster, but at least slightly better. We just went position by position, and it's hard to see any massive downgrade that the Rangers had. I don't think any such downgrade exists. We'll see what happens if Lindgren gets traded, Trouba gets traded, bought out, whatever. We'll see how that goes. That's the other side note that I should mention real quick here. The fact that Ryan Lindgren filed for salary arbitration, that now opens a second buyout window for the Rangers, and any player can be bought out. The only player that's a candidate to be bought out based on the financials going forward of what would happen to any player on the Rangers that gets bought out, the only player is Jacob Trouba. So we'll see if that actually happens. I'm not really holding my breath. I feel like at this point he's just going to be back next season, but we will see what happens there. And as for Ryan Lindgren, his salary arbitration situation, that's another storyline that we'll track going forward here on Locked On New York Rangers. Nothing seems imminent, but we'll discuss that in greater detail and what that all entails and what could be the end result of Ryan Lindgren once again filing for salary arbitration. So we will cover that in a future episode. Figuring we can call it there for today, though, guys. Once again, if you would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.